study of First Peter. I hope it has been a blessing to you. If it's been half the blessing to you that it has been to me, it will be well worthwhile. I'm going to remember First Peter for a long, long time. Not only because of the content, but just the beauty of the book and how it was put together. Because so much of the New Testament was written by the Apostle Paul, we get very comfortable. If you're just going to pick up the New Testament and you're going to just open up the New Testament, particularly after the book of Acts, you're going to pick up, chances are you're going to read the Apostle Paul. It's only when we get to following Hebrews possibly could have been written by Paul. I don't think so, but it possibly could have been written by Paul. But then we get into Hebrews, or we get into James, the letters that John wrote, the letters that Peter wrote, Jude, and then obviously the final book of Revelation. But so we don't hear these other voices very often. We don't hear Peter, we don't hear John quite as frequently. So I have, once again, just loved it to death. And so I hope it's been a beneficial study for you all. So here we are in conclusion of 1 Peter. We're going to begin with verse 5, which could be connected to the study that we did last week on the eldership. I did not include verse 5 because in terms of so much of the content, it really relates to what follows. But I just want to remind us one last final time of where we have been and what the letter has been about. Peter, the congregations to whom Peter is writing are exiles. They are dispersed throughout Asia Minor. And Peter repeatedly, over and over and over again, it's just a pervasive theme all the way through the letter. They are facing trials. They are suffering, they are facing slander, they are facing ridicule, and you get the idea by the time, if you start with chapter 1, verse 1, and you get to the end of chapter 5, that Peter's really concerned about these folks. And are they going to be able to stand up under this suffering? If they are, they have a tremendous, tremendous reward God has in store for them. And that's what we're going to be looking at here in just a moment. However, even though they are facing these trials, this suffering, this slander, this ridicule, they are born again to a new hope. And this hope is what is going to sustain them. These promises of God are what is going to sustain them. And they are called to be holy. And that is a verse that, if you hear any verses that are preached out of 1 Peter, well, there's a couple. This one, that the congregations are called to be holy, for God is holy. The other one, particularly popular among congregations of the churches of Christ, is 1 Peter 3:21, because we've got to get that baptism in there. If we would get the horse in front of the cart, we would be preaching the holiness because we have been baptized. It's a matter of emphasis, and so this idea that these people are to be different and they are to live different lives because they have made the commitment to be uh, washed in the blood of Christ. And so, as we get to this last final little bit, I wrote in my bulletin article this week, you know, uh, does anybody remember actually pulling out a piece of paper or a piece of stationery and a pen and sitting down at your desk and actually writing a letter? Dear so-and-so, how have you been? I've been fine. I want to fill you in on everything that's happened to me the last 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever. And you're writing and you're talking and you're sharing and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden you look down at the bottom of the page. And even if you turn the page over, you still get to the bottom of the page. You're like, whoa, I've got to stop this. I've got to quit writing. And so you start either writing really, really small or doing all kinds of turning the page sideways and writing up and down because you know that you're running out of paper. Well, when you were writing and you were having to use animal skins or very expensive papyrus or anything else, you're writing along, and all of a sudden you get to the end of the scroll. Most letters were written in a long. There were some codexes where you would actually have a square piece of paper, but mostly they were scrolls. And you were getting to the end of the scroll, and it's like, I got to stop. But I've got so much more to say. And so you start writing in shorthand. You start writing these really brief thoughts and ideas. That's really what we have here at the tail end of 1 Peter. He knows he's getting to the end of the scroll. He knows he's getting to the end of his thoughts, but he still has so many thoughts that he wants to talk about. So we're just going to take these one at a time or a couple at a time. So we back up. We're in that, at least in the ESV. The ESV includes chapter 5 and verse 5, in with that paragraph, dealing with the leadership. And there's good reason to do that. It kind of makes sense. But he says, likewise, you who are younger. Well, he started out that paragraph, chapter 5, verse 1, I exhort the elders. But then he realizes, well, not everybody in the congregation is an elder. So, those of you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Be subject to your leaders. Not that we have a problem today being subject to our leaders. Why is it so difficult for us in the 21st century to follow our spiritual leaders? Why are there so many divisions? Why are there so many disagreements in congregations between the leadership and the fellowship? Brad, maybe you can, because you have served as an elder, maybe you could share a little light on that subject. But
I would say that it is not one thing. I would say also that we are in a culture that wants to fix things instead of creating a congregation, let's say, that's resilient to those things. And in acting to fix things, which is really God's responsibility, you end up having people coming up with fixes that either offend or don't include all of those who would wish you to fix it. And so it's a basic mistake that elders are there to fix things. It's a basic mistake to even think that deacons are there to fix things, although that's more in line with it. But we're making a mistake, I think, in our culture as well as our church. Oh, we've got to fix this. It's sort of like, well, it may not be fixable by anybody but God. And we need to work on becoming that spiritual body of people that can say, not what if, but even if. And if you want a larger picture, why I think that is, of course, there are elders that have done things that have damaged the church. But just as many have done things to try to rescue the church. So from that perspective, I think when you set up any group of people on a pedestal, they're going to disappoint you. In fact, there's been times in my life where if somebody had asked me what my specialty is, it would be disappointing. So I think there's two things. One, that cultural overlay that we're not understanding what God is doing, and we're not understanding therefore our role in assisting that. The second thing is that for the most part, we don't like leadership.
No.
The Jewish people hate it, being told what to do by the Romans, and in many cases despise their own leaders, whether they be Sadducees, Pharisees, and things like that. For one reason or another, we don't really like leadership,
Especially in our culture today. Especially now, I could understand the Jews not liking the Romans.
Yeah.
I don't know if they had as great an antipathy to, like, for instance, the spiritual leaders. They might wonder why the priests were so wealthy, when the general population was so poor. And these priests are walking around very opulent, very, very flowery clothing and all that kind of stuff, especially the Pharisees and the Sadducees. But I still think because of their tradition of following the priests, they would probably be a little bit less willing to challenge the spiritual leaders. Now, certainly the political leaders. Otherwise, why would you have groups like the for crying out loud, the zealots?
right?
The zealots were created because they did not like the political leadership, especially the Romans.
One last thing, and it's cogent for this passage that we're reading, and that is a lack of humility.
Yeah.
And so I would say that there are two gifts that God could give any one of us that I think are far and above the other gifts. One is sharing his wisdom with us, and secondly, allowing us to be humble. There's one part of this passage that is just so amazing. Be humble so that God himself may exalt you.
Yes. Yeah, we want to.
That is just stunning. It's such great advice. It's sort of like, don't be tooting your own horn. Let someone else, hopefully even God, exalt you.
Yeah, when we get down to verses 10 and 11, those are such incredible verses.
Right.
Sounds like Brad's politely saying the problem is democracy, freedom of speech, and universal literacy. I don't think we're equal.
You know, it. I have been taught ever since I was old enough to be taught that my view is just as important as anybody else's, that we are all equal. And in the church, I have heard this so many times that somebody who has never studied a particular passage in their whole entire life can sit from the back pew and make a comment, and that comment is just as valuable as the person sitting, standing up here who's studied it for hours and hours and hours. I especially see this in the university. A student, we've got this professor up there. He's got a PhD. He can read his Greek or Hebrew better than the student can read their English that's sitting in front of them. But yet that student's comment, that student's opinion has just as much weight as the professor's. And I'm like, I understand that God created all people equal, but that doesn't mean that we all have. It would be so ridiculous for me to walk into a medical lecture and, a medical professional is up lecturing on some microbe or some this or some that, and I raise my hand and I say, yeah, but I think, what's the doctor going to say? Well, I don't care what you think. This is the science. I'm telling you, I'm teaching you. I don't care what you think.
In a couple of weeks, you can address that at the end of 2 Peter 1. For no prophecy is subject to individual interpretation.
Yeah, there we go. So I love our nation for the individualism that any little boy or any little girl can set their mind to do something and they can achieve it. Not every country, not every culture has that kind of freedom. And that's why so many millions of people are trying to get into our country. But we have to understand that while we might all have opinions, they're not all equal. And we, especially in a congregation that has elders, we appoint those elders to be our leaders. And basically what we're saying to them is, we want you to lead us. We want you to guide us. We are not telling them we want you to guide us if we agree with your guidance. We want you to lead us if, in our opinion, where you're taking us suits us. Now, if we disagree with the leadership, we have a right to ask them why and where we're going and what's their thinking. But it's just counterintuitive to me to place a man in a leadership position and then to tell him, well, you really don't have the authority to lead me. I know I put you up there. I know I appointed you, but that's just kind of a facade. It's just kind of an idea. So yeah, Brad's point is very well taken that we put people on a pedestal and then they disappoint us. But the other thing is we ask them to do a job and then we don't let them do it. And God bless the elders in our congregations, because in so many congregations we put them in such a double bind that we expect them as an elder to lead and to guide and to shepherd the flock, and then on the other hand, we don't let them. Okay, well, we're going to run out of time. We're already pushing that. And so Brad mentioned the second half of verse 5 leading into verse 6. Clothe yourself. Any other different translations?
Humble.
Humble, well, but The ESV begins that with clothe yourself with humility. When we clothe ourselves, what are we doing?
Covering yourself.
Well, what?
Covering yourself.
Covering. All right? Draping.
Whatever.
Yeah. So we are to clothe ourselves, all of you, all y'all. Okay? With humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you. What was it Jesus said about when you go to a feast? You're invited to a banquet. What chair do you sit in?
The least.
Yeah. You're just glad to be there. You just want to take, so that if the master of the feast wants to exalt you, he can say, no, I want you up on the dais. I want you up with the hoity-toity. Okay. Don't go up and sit on the dais by yourself, because the master of the feast might come up and say, excuse me, that chair's for Manuel. Oh, really? Manuel? Why Manuel? So, and then you have to get down and walk to the back of the banquet hall and sit way back at the back. So, let God do the exalting, not you. So that's verses 5 and 6. I wanted to ask this question, and I honestly don't know that I have an answer for this. If you look at a nation, a group of people as a nation, who would you identify as a humble nation? A humble nation of people? One of the interesting things I had studied in one of my classes was the idea that nations will adopt a personality. You got the Germans, follow the rules, follow the rules. You got the Australians, and they're, what rules? Kick back, have fun, just smile, just laugh, just have a good time. You know, we as a nation are make money, more money, more. Spend money. Can you identify a nation that you would consider to be really kind of a quiet, gentle, humble people? Finland? I was thinking Norway, Sweden. I was thinking that general area. You know, it's just hard to get those people riled up about anything. Maybe to their detriment. Maybe they could use a little bit more riling up every once in a while. I was thinking of Canada. You know, they're kind of a laid back, but I don't know. They're French, so they've got that French pride, or some of them.
They have a lot to be humble about.
But it's kind of funny how you can kind of look at nations and I realize every nation is made up of a whole bunch of different people, but so I was thinking kind of the Scandinavian area, the Finland or Sweden, Norway, those folks. Can you think of a church or a religious association where you would, if you picture somebody as being a part of that group, oh, they're a humble people. Quakers, Amish, Mennonites. Just very, very difficult to get those people riled up. Now, I'm sure it happens. Please don't, overthink what I'm saying. But wouldn't it be nice if people recognize the Church of Christ as being a group of humble people? That would be wonderful. Okay, who's bigger, you or God? Casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Name one thing in your life that you have either accomplished or prevented by worrying about Okay. Okay. Yeah, we can prevent sleep by worrying about it. I used, when I was in junior high school, especially, not terribly gifted academically, I would literally worry myself sick about a test. Uh, and it never did me any good. Now, if I studied, it might would have helped me pass the test. But spending a sleepless night before I had to take a test or turn in a project didn't really accomplish anything. So, casting all of your cares upon God. Why? Peter gives us a good reason. Why? He's watching out for us. He cares for us. He knows what's important. All right, verses 8 and 9, another more well-known passage out of 1 Peter. Be sober-minded. Any different translations there? The first phrase of verse 8, sober-minded.
Sober spirit.
Sober spirit.
Self-control.
Self-controlled. Be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion. And this really is one of the very well-known passages out of 1 Peter. Seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith. Okay. This is interesting. The word Satan in the Old Testament, the word Satan in Hebrew means adversary or accuser. And I really think that's where Peter's going here. There are many passages in the Old Testament where our English will use the word accuser or adversary, and the word there literally is Satan. Not capital S, but little s. And so Satan is our adversary. He's the one who's trying to defeat us, but not just in a court, which that image is a courtroom metaphor. But Peter mixes his metaphors. We're told we're never supposed to do that, and Peter does it beautifully. So our adversary, the one who's accusing us in a court of law, is also a roaring lion, roaming around, waiting to snatch somebody, seeking whom he may devour. We are to resist him, firm in our faith. And then remember that we are not alone. Knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. I will say that in these last few verses, there are a whole bunch of different variant readings, different words, or different forms of words. So what I'm reading out of the ESV might not be exactly what you're reading in your edition there, your translation. But basically the idea is you think you're all alone because people don't like you, because people are slandering you, because people are ridiculing you, and we get this, nobody likes me, everybody hates me, I'm going to eat some worms. And Peter says, no, you're not alone. We do know that, particularly in the back half of the first century, say between AD 50 and AD 90, there was not a worldwide persecution of Christians. There were sporadic persecutions of Christians, some of them very, very violent. But just because you were Christian did not mean that you were automatically going to be arrested and thrown into the arena to be eaten by a lion. That might have occurred. We actually have letters. Governors of certain areas would write to the emperor, and I can't remember, I think it was Pliny writing to Trajan, the Emperor Trajan, saying, I've got this group called the Christians. What am I supposed to do with them? And Trajan wrote back and said, well, if they're not causing any problem, don't do anything to them. And if they're causing problems, you're a good Roman. You know what to do. But everywhere, all across the Christian world, these particularly Jews would be kicked out of the synagogue. They would be ridiculed. They would be slandered. And so Peter's saying, you're not alone. Okay, verse 9, you're not alone. Now, verses 10 and 11. Amazing, beautiful passage. And after you have suffered a little while, I like that, suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself, and think about these 4 words, restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. I'm sure your different translations have a different set of 4 words. What are some different translations? I have restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish.
The only one different in the NASB is perfect
Okay.
instead of reform, or whatever your first one is.
Oh,
Perfect.
perfect. So ESV has restore. Okay. Any other different words there? And over the past several weeks, we've been I've been selecting passages to meditate on. And if you want to spend a week meditating on 4 words, how God, following a period of our suffering, just these verses 10 and 11, the God of all grace, who has called you. We can meditate on the idea of being called. And I suddenly realized that I did not underline that. I have been underlining the word call in kind of a purple, and I need to go back because I didn't see that. I've been working on this lesson for weeks, and I didn't underline that. So God has called us to his eternal glory in Christ. What a calling. What a blessing. Will himself restore, confirm, strengthen. And now Peter's really getting to the end of his piece of paper, his scroll, but he throws in a little prayer. To him be the dominion forever and ever. Amen. Now, in this last little snippet of paper that he's got left, by Silvanus. Your translation might have the word Silas, the name Silas there. Okay, Silas, Silvanus, 2 different ways. A faithful brother, as I regard him, I have written briefly to you. Some people think that, well, a couple of things, that Peter dictated the letter and Silas was the actual penman who actually wrote it down. There's another idea that Peter said, Silas, you know me. You know my teaching. If I suddenly had a case of laryngitis, you could stand up and preach my sermon for me better than I probably could preach it myself. Therefore, Silas, why don't you write this letter and I'll read it, and then if I like what you wrote, I'll sign off on it. That could possibly explain the significant difference in Greek, in the quality of Greek between 1 Peter and 2 Peter. Talked about early when we introduced 1 Peter, the level of Greek in 1 Peter is very high. It's a very polished Greek. The level of Greek in 2 Peter is not. It's very rough. It's not uneducated Greek, but it's very, very different quality of Greek than 1 Peter. So that would explain if Silas was actually the one who used his phraseology and his thinking and his words that might explain the difference. We don't know. He could have just, Peter could have dictated it, and Silas said, I've got a much better word for that. So it could be Peter's dictation. When we look at the letter to the Romans, who actually wrote Romans? Trick question. Well, let's flip back over, and he tells us in Romans chapter 16 and verse 22. I, Tertius, who wrote this letter, greet you in the Lord. I thought Paul wrote Romans. Yeah, he did. And Tertius wrote Romans. Paul was the author, Tertius was the writer, right? So Peter could have been the author of 1 Peter, but Silas could have been the writer of 1 Peter, if that makes any sense at all. I hope it does. I wish we had a little bit more time. I have written briefly to you, exhorting and declaring that this is the true grace of God. What is the this? The entire letter? Or just the last paragraph? So many questions, so little time. She who is at Babylon, who is likewise chosen, sends you greetings. Who is, where is, what is Babylon? By this time, Babylon is just a big old heap of ruins. The Persians have gone in and just taken Babylon to the ground. Most scholars, overwhelming majority of scholars, believe that Peter is referring to Rome here. By this time, certainly among the Jews, Rome, the city of Rome, was referred to as Babylon because they're big, bad, mean, nasty, ugly people, and God's going to take care of them. And the Christians kind of picked up on that phraseology. As does Mark, my son. Which Mark is he referring to? John Mark. It's interesting, when Peter was rescued out of prison, where did he go? To the home of John Mark, to the home of Mary, the mother of John Mark. So, are they brothers? Are they cousins? Peter refers to Mark as his son. Is that a spiritual son? Is that a physical son? Probably spiritual. Greet one another with a holy fist bump. Or a kiss. I'm kind of more of a holy fist bump kind of guy, but let your brothers and sisters know that you love them. All right. Peace to all of you who are in Christ. I could turn around and start all over next week, but we'll leave 1 Peter where it is, and thank goodness for what a beautiful letter that is. Let's take a break as we get ready for our worship service and meet and greet folks with a holy fist bump as folks come in.